All right, YouTube. What do you have to say for yourself? All right, I see silent treatment, huh? Oh, whoa, wait, hold on. Maybe this will help. Didn't realize you had your mouth stuffed. There, that's better. Now, who sent you? Thomas? From Thomas and Stereo? Hey, wait a second. Are you two the new Galion TS Voyager speakers? Oh, yeah, okay, sorry. Transmission line speakers. This should be interesting. Now, I'm always on the lookout for equipment that will enhance the vinyl record experience. And the two heavies that you saw opening up this particular video fit the bill. And I want to talk to you about what I heard. When I purchased the Galion TS 120 Standard Edition, maybe a year or so ago, a little bit over a year ago, Thomas at Thomas and Stereo had mentioned that he was also designing and working on a speaker offering. So I said, if you ever want somebody to listen to them, once the speakers are ready, I'd be more than happy to do so. So here we are. And since then, he has come out with two models. He has the TS Voyager and the TS Voyager TL. The TL stands for transmission line, and that's what this is. Now, a transmission line speaker isn't your run-of-the-mill speaker. It's a cleverly designed speaker that uses a line, or I should say a pathway, inside the cabinet enclosure. And that pathway is meant to manage the sound waves that are emanating from behind the speaker driver. Instead of just letting them be absorbed or reflected within the enclosure itself, they're channeled through that transmission line. Now, transmission line speakers are designed for enhanced bass performance. And because of that, they're a little bit more difficult to engineer and manufacture than, say, a sealed enclosure or a ported speaker. And speaking of bass response, that's what these are for, these foam sets that you saw me with remove at the very top of the episode. Right now, the speaker is fully open on the bottom port here. There's one foam piece that will completely fill it. And then there's one that's about, I'd say it's a little bit more than half of the enclosure. And it's complete personal preference whether you want to listen to it with any of the foam set or either foam set or to leave it fully open. Some other things I do want to mention though. The tweeter is a 1 1/8 inch silk tweeter from Dayton Audio, and the 5-inch paper cone is from SB Acoustics. There's also a magnetic grill cover if you want to use that. And in the back, there's two binding posts. These are 5-way binding posts, so they'll accept a number of connections. My cables are banana clips. And it's a hefty little speaker. It's about 14 inches tall, 14 inches deep. And the enclosure itself is stained birchwood, so it's got a really solid feel to it. Another thing I want to mention is this is an 8-ohm speaker. And the sensitivity is listed as 84 dB. So because of that, you do want an amp that has a little bit more power to drive it. But I have a caveat to that, which I found surprising. So we'll get to that in just a second. Another thing I really do like about these is it's got a slight vintage look to it. And if you know me at all, I'm all about the aesthetics of a vintage look. It's probably what drew me to my KLH Model 5s and also my Thorns turntable. It's something I enjoy. Now, I've had these speakers for a few weeks now, and I've listened to them in both my review room and also my main listening room. And those two rooms really couldn't be any more different. My main listening room is much smaller, and my review room is much larger. And I also tend to listen at lower volumes. And I think that's also because I'm getting a little bit older. But I would say I don't go much above 75 dB when I'm listening. Now, I mentioned that you want a bit more power to drive these. Thomas mentions on the website that you probably want about 50 watts to drive these. Well, the thing is, I don't really have that opportunity. Or with my speakers, I have two speakers here in the house. I have a Denon 600NE, which will deliver 70 watts, but to a 4-ohm speaker. Give it this 8-ohm, and it's only going to deliver about 45 watts. My Galion TS 120, I like to listen to it in Class A. And in Class A, it's going to deliver 30 watts. I believe Class AB, if I switch it to Class AB, I can get 50 watts, but I don't bother listening in Class AB. I really like Class A, and that's what I want to discuss. Now, I listen to a variety of music through these speakers, and most of my time was spent listening to them in the review room. Now, I listened to it with the fully open and also using both foam sets. And I did find that I preferred it with the half foam as opposed to the full foam. The full foam to me sounded a bit muffled, and I suspect that if you're using these speakers as, say, desktop speakers, that the full foam would be sufficient, and that's probably the best way to listen to it. I was surprised, though. I expected, because that review room is much larger, I expected to enjoy that more, fully open. In this case, the balance provided by the half foam, the balance of the bass and everything else, it sounded a bit better to me. So what did I think? I'm glad you asked. As a reference album, I listened to a few different albums, but one that I settled on, which was perfect for this, was John Coltrane's Crescent. Now, before I listened through the Voyager TLs, I listened to this through Klipsch 600 Mark IIs that I have up in the review room right now. And I've always thought they sounded a little bit bright, especially with this album and other jazz albums for that matter. I found Coltrane's saxophone to be, slightly bright, a little bit shrill, a little bit fatiguing after a bit. That wasn't the case with the Voyager TLs. Coltrane's saxophone wasn't shrill. It was smooth. It was enjoyable. And, listening through this the whole way through, absolutely fine. No problem whatsoever. Just like it's the same tonality I experience when I listen to in my main room through the KLH Model 5s and the Galion TS 122 amp. So I completely enjoyed it. What made me really impressed was, after listening to this, I thought, the mid-range was, in a word, wonderful. The mid-range really was surprising. And I recalled reading in the literature before getting these speakers that the mid-range was supposed to be impressive. And I think it has something to do with the Jupiter capacitors that it uses, that the speaker uses. So I wanted to try it with the vocals. So I pulled out Carole King's Tapestry and also Etta James' At Last. Now, I think I've talked about this before, but Carole King's Tapestry is a great album to try these things out with. I've always felt that the original recording left a little bit to be desired, that Carole's voice was, came across a little bit sibilant in spots, and I think that's completely because of how it was recorded. The MoFi one-step remaster of just a couple years ago, that took care of it somewhat. I mean, it did correct for that, and that's probably the best sounding version of that album you can find. So playing that through the Voyager transmission line speakers here, it was even better. It was even smoother. It was like Carole was in the room. And that's one thing I do want to mention. Now, typically when I review a piece of equipment, I'll listen to a new piece of equipment, and I'm sure it's for many folks, you tend to listen to the sound, the playback sound, the sound that you're getting. And I was doing that. But then I forgot I was reviewing these speakers, and I got lost in the music. Now, I can't think of a better compliment than that. Now, in my review room, I sit about 8 feet away. And like I said, I was driving the speakers with the Denon 600NE, and that was delivering, like I said, about 45 watts. So slightly below the 50 watts that are recommended. I brought these speakers down to my main listening room. Now, there I'm listening with my Galion TS 120 all-tube amp, and I still expected a very smooth response because it's an all-tube path from my Tavish phono stage to the Galion. But that's in Class A, so that's only 30 watts. That's 20 watts below the recommended that Thomas states on the website. I didn't care. I mean, it sounded great. I mean, I sit about 6 feet away in the main listening room, and the speakers, the KLH Model 5s, are about 6 to 7 feet away typically, and I put these right in front of those and then brought my chair back a bit. So I was still about 6 feet away. And again, it was the same smoothness, the same enjoyment, the music. These aren't, and one thing I should mention, these are not analytical speakers. They're very musical, and they're also just damned smooth, especially that mid-range. So that's another thing I want to mention. Because this is a vinyl record channel, I do tend to gravitate towards equipment that will complement the vinyl record listening experience. These do that. Now, if you're someone who listens to very loud music and really driving bass, you will want an amplifier that will drive these. But don't shy away from pairing these with something slightly below the 50 watts. I'm telling you, I didn't notice the difference. It sounded wonderful to me. You just don't want to pump up the volume too high. You don't go Spinal Tap and go up to 11. Now, Thomas does have a solid state amp now. It's the TS A75, and that amp will, I believe, puts out 75 watts, and it just hit me. It's the A75, so yes, it is 75 watts. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Anyway, so that puts out 75 watts. It's a solid state amp. I did ask Thomas if I can hang on to these a bit longer and hear how they sound with a more powerful amp. So look for that soon. I'll post that as soon as I've had a chance to pair these with an amp that's over and above, the 50 watts that's stated. So until I send these back, I'm going to enjoy them a little bit longer. Now, if you have any questions or any comments about any of this, please, drop them below. I'll be happy to answer anything I can, especially with my experience with these or any of the equipment I used and such. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, take care of yourself and enjoy your records.